Hello there, guys, and well done for logging on and signing up to today's lesson. For those of you that don't know me or missed me last week, my name's Mr. Davis. I'm one of the science teachers at St Leonard's, and I'm going to be assisting the other teachers in producing some of the online materials, certainly for biology, for the rest of this term. Now, last week's lesson, if you caught it, was about blood and blood vessels. So a nice subject to move on to from that is about the heart. And that's what today's lesson is going to be about. We're going to be looking at the structure of the heart, and we're going to be, and the circulatory system that it's related to, and we're going to be looking how that structure including the role of the major blood vessels, the valves within the heart, and the relative thickness of chamber walls within the heart, how all of those specific structures relate to the function of the heart, which is to pump blood around the body. Also, we're going to be looking at calculating the heart rate or stroke volume or cardiac output using the equation cardiac output is equal to stroke volume times heart rate. Now, the reason we're going to be looking at the heart is because it is an essential organ. It's an awesome organ. It's amazing for a whole range of reasons. Hopefully, you'll be able to appreciate some of those at the end of the lesson. But it's an essential organ that's used for pumping blood around and other substances around our bodies. Okay, so before we get into the actual nitty-gritty of the lesson, guys, what you're going to need for this lesson is a pen or a pencil, a notepad or a piece of paper, and you are also likely to need a calculator. I've tried to keep the maths of this lesson quite low and quite relatively straightforward, but you may need a calculator as well. So if you haven't got pen, paper, and or a calculator, then just pause the video now, run off, get yourself all the equipment you're going to need for this lesson, and then come back, sit yourselves down in a nice space, and we'll progress with the rest of the lesson. So just pause the video now, go get your stuff, get yourself sat down, and we'll be good to go. Okay then, guys, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of the lesson, what I'm going to get you to do is just a quick do it now, a series of 6 questions. These are all questions that I've taken directly from the stuff that we did last week. If you didn't do last week's lesson, still have a go at these questions and see if you can remember any of the answers from your earlier years at St Leonard's. But if you'd like to pause the video now, just have a quick go at these 6 questions, and once you've done that, we'll cut back on, we'll go through the answers. It's just a bit of a memory jogger from last week's lesson. So pause the video now, and we'll... Okay, well done, guys, for having a go at that. So we've got 6 questions about blood vessels and types of blood cells and what the blood's actually made up of. So the first question is, what blood vessels carry blood away from the heart? Now, the word away is key because it begins with A, and the answer is arteries. So arteries begin with A, and they carry blood away from the heart. What blood vessels carry blood to the heart? That's the veins. What special features do arteries have that enable them to carry blood pumped from the heart? Well, because if we remember, the blood that comes out of the heart is at an immense pressure. So they need to have thick, elastic, muscular walls to withstand that pressure. But they've also got to have that small lumen, that small gap in the middle of the blood vessel that enables them to maintain that high blood pressure as the blood travels around the body. Capillaries are where nutrients and oxygen are diffused out of the bloodstream and waste products are diffused into the bloodstream. As I said last week, it's the business end of what the blood does. What special features do they have to improve this function? Now, if you can remember back from last week, they split many times and become smaller and smaller blood vessels, and that vastly increases their surface area. So they've got a large surface area, and also the walls of these blood vessels, the walls of your capillaries, are actually just one cell thick. So that gives them a very short diffusion pathway. And both of those 2 factors combined means that they're very, very good at diffusing substances into and out of the bloodstream. How much of your blood is formed of erythrocytes? Now, remember, erythrocytes is the posh word for red blood cells. These are the parts of your blood that carry oxygen around to all the different cells of your body, and your blood is made up, 45% of your blood is made up of red blood cells. And what is the function of white blood cells? White blood cells, if you can remember from last week, are related to your immune system, and they are used to fight infection and to inactivate or destroy pathogens that you get in our body. And pathogens are microorganisms that can cause you harm, can make you ill, like a virus. COVID virus is an example of one, or the common cold, or the flu, or a bacterial infection or a fungal infection. These are all produced by pathogens. Okay, so we're going to look at the heart. Now, the mammals have what's known as a double circulation system, and that means that our hearts can be have 4 chambers, and they can be effectively cut in half to produce 2 different pumps. Now, the heart is effectively a massive pump. It's a very effective pump, and what it does is it takes blood from the body, it pumps it through one half of the heart through to the lungs. That's where the blood releases all its carbon dioxide that we breathe out and takes up all the oxygen that we breathe in. The blood is then returned back to the heart so it can be given another pumping so it can go around the rest of the body, supplying oxygen to all the different tissues and cells of every other part of our body that we need. So you can see that quite nicely on our diagram. The blood comes from the body through the vein system. You've got this blue arrow here indicating it's deoxygenated, it's done it, the blood's done its job, it gets to the heart. From the heart, it's then pumped up to the lungs. This is where the carbon dioxide is released. This is where the oxygen, more importantly, is uptaken. And then the blood travels back down to the heart before it's pumped for a second time back to the body, delivering that oxygen and those nutrients to all the different cells of the body. So if you can just pause the video now for a few moments, make sure you've copied down that red box on the screen in front of you. And if you can just jot down a rough notation of that diagram as well. You don't need to draw an amazing diagram of lung, heart, or the body. You can just use those words and then draw the arrows that you can see on that diagram. So pause the video now, copy down that red box, and then draw a quick diagram of that diagram on the screen in front of you. Okay, guys, well done for having a go at that. We're going to move on to the next part. Now, we're going to actually look at the heart itself. Now, the heart is an amazing organ. It is formed of a very, very special type of muscle cell called cardiac muscle. Now, your heart is the only place where you find cardiac muscle, and it is utterly amazing muscle tissue because it never tires. Now, from the moment your heart is fully formed, when you, just as you, whilst you're still inside your mother's womb, your heart starts beating. And it will beat continuously throughout your life till the day you die. And that beating continuously, despite that fact, it never ever tires. It never becomes tired. It requires a large amount of oxygen and the to maintain that level of effort and that constant pumping, that constant contraction, but the muscle itself never ever tires. And that's a really important factor, because you don't really want to have a tired heart, because then effectively you're not pumping the blood around your body properly. So the journey that the blood takes as it travels through our heart, this diagram looks really, really quite complicated, but actually it is quite straightforward. And we're going to go through the route that the blood takes as it travels through the heart. So initially, all the veins of your body, after that carrying deoxygenated blood, feed into the vena cava, and that's your main vein that takes all the blood back into the heart. And so the deoxygenated blood returns to the heart from the body via the vena cava, that main vein, to what's known as the right atrium. And what we can see when we look at this diagram is that the right atrium is quite clearly on the left-hand side of this diagram. Now, don't be confused, that is intentional. The reason that diagrams for heart are very, very often laid out in this fashion, they almost always are, is because this is what the heart would look like if it was in someone's chest and you were looking at them. So in that same kind of mirror image effect, what would be on the right hand side, so the right ventricle of that person, when you look at them and their heart in their chest, that would be on your left hand side. And that's simply why the diagram is laid out in that fashion. It's as you would be looking at the heart in a human body. So, as we say, the deoxygenated blood returns from the heart to the body via the vena cava to the right atrium. And again, we can see, as I said, that's the top chamber up here, and it's on the left-hand side of the heart. Now, upon contraction, the deoxygenated blood is then forced past what's called a tricuspid valve. So it's forced past this valve into the right ventricle. These valves are really important, guys. So as the blood is forced past the tricuspid valves, they stop the blood from being able to squirt back into the right atrium. So these valves are very, very important, and they ensure that the blood travels in the right direction. So the blood passes into the right ventricle. From there, the next contraction of the heart will force that deoxygenated blood into the pulmonary artery. Now, this is the only artery in the body that carries deoxygenated blood. It's still termed as an artery because it's carrying blood away from the hearts to the lungs. Once the blood gets to the lungs, it becomes oxygenated through that process of diffusion that you covered a few weeks back, and then returns back to the heart via the pulmonary vein. So the pulmonary vein is the vein that links the lungs to the heart, and the blood is then oxygenated and travels to the left-hand atrium that you can see in the top part of the right-hand side of this diagram of the heart. Then the heart contracts again, and as it contracts, it forces that blood down in past the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve into the left ventricle. Now, from the left ventricle, with the next contraction of the heart, the blood is forced through this set of valves into the aorta and is then pumped and supplied to the rest of the body. Now, because the left ventricle is pumping blood to the entire body, it actually has to have a higher pressure for the blood that it's pumping out. And to do that, it has this much, much thicker chamber wall. It's got a lot more muscle there, and that's because the right side of the heart, the right ventricle, is only pumping blood to the lungs and back, so it doesn't need the same level of pressure that the left ventricle does, because that's pumping blood around the entire body. So the left ventricle has a much thicker, more muscular chamber wall to enable it to produce more pressure and to pump that blood all the way around the body. So that's another real key adaptation that the heart has to enable it to do its job and to perform its function. So we've got a few adaptations that we can talk about here, guys. We've got the tricuspid valves or bicuspid valves, the valves that ensure the blood flows in the correct direction. We've got the whole heart being made out of a muscle that never tires. And we've got that left ventricle that's got a very thick chamber wall to allow it to produce more pressure to supply blood around the entire body. So we're going to have a quick recap here. We've got a quick series of 5 fairly simple questions covering what we just had a look at on the diagrams of the heart. Pause the video at this point, guys. Have a quick go at these questions, and we'll go through the answers once you've had a chance. So pause the video now, have a go at the questions, and we'll go through the answers afterwards. Okay, well done, guys. That's well done for having a go at these. Now, the first question we've got here, what does the heart do? It is effectively a pump that pumps blood to the lungs and then around the rest of the body. Okay, so it's that double circulation system. It pumps blood to the lungs so it can get rid of the carbon dioxide and pick up the oxygen, and then around the rest of the body. So it's a pump. That's its main purpose. Which side of the heart pumps blood to the lungs? Now, if we remember, it was the right hand side. It happens on the or the left hand side of the image, but it was the right hand side of the heart. So it's the right side of the heart that pumps blood to the lungs, and it's the left side of the heart that pumps blood to the rest of the body. What special feature does the left-hand side of the heart have to enable it to pump blood around the body? If you can remember back a few moments ago, we were talking about the real large thickness of the wall of the left ventricle and how muscular that is and how it can produce much more pressure. So it has a thicker muscular wall, and that's the special adaptation it has to allow it to produce that high pressure. And what was the purpose of the valves that we were looking at in the heart, the bicuspid and tricuspid valves? And they are to ensure that blood flows in the correct direction. It's to ensure that blood doesn't leak back into the atriums from the ventricles. Okay, well done for having a go at those questions, guys. Give yourself a score out of 5, and we'll move on to the next part of the lesson. So we've got what I'd like you guys to do is just follow me through and actually try and copy this diagram down into your books. It's really useful for you for your notes for revision. So get a nice big open blank piece of paper or blank page. In the middle of your page, I'd like you to draw this square out and then segment it into quarters, and each of those quarters, as you can see in front of you, on the left-hand side, I would like you to write right atrium, right ventricle, and on the right hand side I need you to write left atrium, left ventricle. Place this box in the middle of your page, guys, because we are going to be drawing some arrows around this box so that we can show the route and pathway that blood takes as it travels through the heart from the body. So once you've drawn this diagram, if you still need a few moments, pause the video quickly, just get the diagram drawn, and we're going to then follow on with the rest of the diagram. So after you've drawn that, what I'd like you to do is write the body, or from the body, onto the left-hand side of the box, and just draw yourself a nice arrow, which you label with the vena cava going from the body into the right atrium, okay? So draw that arrow and label it. Then we're going to draw another arrow, traveling, as that heart contracts, the blood moves down into the right ventricle, and then with the next contraction, it enters the pulmonary artery. Now I'm going to draw a few arrows, and then up above the heart, up above our box, I would like you to write the word the lungs. So label this arrow down here as pulmonary artery and how it travels all the way up to the lungs. And then at the lungs, as we know, that's where the gaseous exchange occurs. That's where our carbon dioxide comes out of our body and our oxygen gets into our body and, more importantly, into our bloodstream. So our arrows have turned red on this instance. And then the blood leaves the lungs via the pulmonary vein. Remember, veins carry blood to the heart. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. So the blood is currently traveling to the heart from the lungs down the pulmonary vein. The next contraction will send the blood into the left ventricle. And then the following contraction after that will send the blood into the aorta and then to the rest of the body. Now, what I'd like you guys to do very quickly is pause the video if you need to, and then just make sure you've got that diagram down in your notes. Make sure you understand the passage that the blood takes as it travels through the heart to from the body, going through the heart, through the lungs, back to the body. So pause the video now. Make sure you've got this diagram down. Okay, guys, well done for having a go at that. We've got a little bit more we're going to do on this. What I've got here is effectively, it's a very similar thing to what you've just done. It's just a word version of it. And hopefully this is really going to enable it to bed into your memory, and you'll be able to pull this out when you need it in the future. So what I'm going to get you to do is copy and complete this flow diagram of the circulation system. Now, we've just drawn it out as a diagram, so it should be fairly fresh in your mind. If you guys feel confident of copying and completing this paragraph about or this flow diagram of the circulation system, pause this video now and fill it in. If you're not confident, I will be putting up a word bank of the missing words, so you can make your decision. If you feel confident, you can answer filling all those blanks. Pause the video now, and we'll be going through the answers in a few minutes. For those of you that don't feel that you're quite confident enough really to have to get every answer right on this flow diagram, what I'm going to do now is just pop up a word bank. It's there in front of you guys. If you now use that word bank to insert into the missing gaps, and then again, pause the video now, use that word bank, and we'll go through the answers with everyone in just a few moments. Okay, well done for having a go at this, guys. Okay, so it's exactly the same as the diagram that we just drew out. We're going to go through this flow diagram now. So the blood comes from the body via the venous system, all collects together in the vena cava. That then feeds into the right atrium. From the right atrium, it passes the tricuspid valves into the right ventricle, and then it passes from the right ventricle into the pulmonary artery, then to the lungs. Pardon me, sorry. From the lungs, it then enters the pulmonary vein. From the pulmonary vein, it goes, that returns the blood from the lungs to the left atrium, where it moves down into the left ventricle before being pumped into the aorta and being supplied to the rest of the body, guys. So give yourselves a mark out of 5 for that. Hopefully, yeah, you were able to get all of those questions right. And we're gonna, before we move on, I'll just recap the special features of the heart. We've got the cardiac muscle, the muscle that never tires, and that despite the fact it works tirelessly throughout your entire life. We've got those thick chambered walls of the left ventricle to produce that pressure to pump the blood around the entire body. And then we've got those valves, those bicuspid and tricuspid valves within the heart to ensure that the blood is traveling in the right direction through the circulation system. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next part of the lesson. We had two things that we're going to be looking at today's lesson. One is the structure and function of the heart. The other is to what we can actually calculate effectively how much blood is pumped out of the heart in every minute. And that's known as the cardiac output. Now, the cardiac output is the total volume of blood that is pumped by a ventricle every minute. What I'd like you guys to do is just copy that red box down into your notes. It's a really, really key statement that you guys need to be able to recall. The cardiac output is the total volume of blood that is pumped by a ventricle every minute, and it can be calculated as cardiac output is equal to heart rate times stroke volume. Now, I've also included a range of different units that can be applied to these different aspects: cardiac output, heart rate, and stroke volume. Now, heart rate is always recorded as beats per minute. That's kind of the industry standard, if you would, for heart rate. So you'll always see heart rate recorded as either beats per minute in words or BPM. Now, alongside that, we've got various ways of recording stroke volume. So stroke volume is the amount of blood that's being pumped out of the heart with every, or of the ventricle with every single beat. And that can be recorded as centimeters cubed per beat. It can be recorded as milliliters per stroke. A milliliter is identical to a centimeter cube. They're both volumetric measurements, and actually one equals the other. So you can change them around, and you'll see I've done that on some of my examples of different units that you could use to mention. They all mean exactly the same thing. So milliliters and centimeters cubed are equal. And also another thing that you might see, the questions are being laid out in different ways. The cardiac output is an amount of blood by time. So it's an amount of blood per minute. And that's what this symbol here is. So we've got a volumetric amount, a cubic centimeter, X amount of cubic centimeters every minute, per minute. That's what that -1 symbol means. It means per, or divided by is another way of explaining it. And another way of writing it is this forward slash that you can see in the pink unit at the bottom. But you will find that sometimes the questions will ask the information that or supply you information that may require a unit change. If you're sitting down in an exam or you're doing a test, you may find you need to do a unit change. Personally, I always try and stick to the units that are in the question but always make sure that you put a unit down in any answer that you give. A number in science has almost no meaning unless you attach a unit to it. The amount of marks, amount of times I've marked tests and exams, and I've seen students lose marks because they understand the science, they understand what they've got to do, but what they fail to do is put the unit down, letting us know fully that they are understanding the science. So the unit is a real key thing, guys. Please always try and make sure you include the appropriate units in your work. Okay, so if I was to be trying to answer a question in an exam about the cardiac output, or I was trying to calculate the cardiac output or the heart rate or the stroke volume, what I would do, my first thing I would do is I would arrange that equation into a formula triangle. Now, I'm not sure how much experience you guys have with it, formula triangles. I'm expecting most of you to have been exposed to them at some point during your time at St Leonard's. But if you haven't, I'm just going to give you a very, very quick run through of how they work to ensure that you're able to do the work that's going to be moving on from this point. Okay, so if I was to be arranging this equation into a formula triangle, the first thing I'm going to do is draw myself a triangle. And I'd like you guys to do the same. So alongside that triangle, I am going to separate the three corners of that triangle out with one horizontal line and one vertical line, as you can see on the diagram in front of you. Again, copy this as we're going along, guys. I then put two dividing signs just underneath the horizontal lines, and that's just a bit of a memory jogger. You may not need to put those in there. Some people do, some people don't. I have done so on this instance. And right next to the vertical line, I've also included a multiplication symbol. Now I'm going to add cardiac output as the top point of my triangle. I'm going to put heart rate and stroke volume in either side of that. So if you can, guys, if you can draw that triangle out, pause the video now, just draw that triangle out, make sure you've got it somewhere in your notes, because it's really, really quite a useful tool for being able to resolve any of these style of questions. Okay, if you've never used one of these triangles before, and this is completely new to you, I'm just going to spend a couple of slides very quickly going through how they work. So if I was trying to work out the cardiac output of someone, I knew their heart rate and I knew their stroke volume, and I didn't know the cardiac output, all I would do is I would draw my triangle out. I would put my thumb over the part that says cardiac output, and I know that the rest of the sum is available in front of me. I know that my cardiac output, as I've covered it, is equals to the heart rate times the stroke volume. Okay, so that's how if I wanted to calculate cardiac output, I'd put my thumb over cardiac output. If I wanted to calculate heart rate, guess what I'm going to do? It's not that big a guess, guys, not that difficult. What I will do is I'll place my thumb over heart rate. And that again means that I now know that heart rate is equal to cardiac output divided by stroke volume. Okay. And finally, stroke volume. I think you're probably guessing where I'm going to go with this, guys. But stroke volume, put your thumb over stroke volume. You know that stroke volume is equal to cardiac output divided by heart rate. Okay, so that's how you use an equation, a formula triangle. Very, very straightforward, guys. They're a really useful tool. If you can arrange equations more easily using a technique you've been taught in maths, the inverse method or the balance method, please use those if you feel more confident in doing so. These are just a tool that it means that the maths isn't going to inhibit you from being able to learn the science. That's why I've done this, guys. Okay, so from that triangle, we've got those three different equations. It may be that your mind is better able to recall those equations just as equations, or it may be that you prefer to use the triangle. I'm quite happy for you to recall either. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions. I'm going to work through these questions with you so that we can have so you can see how I would attempt to answer this question before I let you have a couple of questions for you to have a go at yourself. If you're confident and you want to have a go now, pause the video. I'm going to do this as a modelled example, so I'm going to work through it with everyone. But if you feel you're confident of having a go, you can pause the video now and have a go, and you can join us as I'm working through and explaining it to everyone else. So, a well-trained athlete has an average stroke volume of 100 cubic centimetres and a cardiac output of 5,000 cubic centimetres per minute. What is their heart rate? So if I get a question like this in exam, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and work out what the question is asking me. This question's very, very kind. It's put the question, then the idea of the question very, very clearly, and we're trying to find out what is their heart rate. So the first thing I would do in an exam with this question is I would highlight heart rate, making sure I remember that's the question. Always answer the question that you're asked, not the question you think you've been asked. So always read the question closely, guys. I would then highlight the other key facts that I think this question contains, and they're both the stroke volume of 100 centimeters cubed and the cardiac output of 5,000 centimeters cubed per minute. I then draw my triangle. Now I know I'm trying to find out the heart rate of this well-trained athlete, so I cover the heart rate. That means I know the equation I need to use is heart rate equals cardiac output divided by stroke volume. So I just drop those figures in, and I've already highlighted from the question, heart rate is equal to 5,000 cubic centimeters per minute divided by 100 cubic centimeters. And that gives us a heart rate of 50 beats per minute. Now, remember, I've put the units there. I've put both types. Either of those types of units would be fine, but that's working through that question and ensuring that I've put the units on and exactly how I would do it. So again, we're going to have another go. We'll have another question. This time about a non-athlete. Now, the non-athlete has an average stroke volume of 70 cubic centimeters and a cardiac output of 4,900 cubic centimeters per minute. What is their heart rate? So again, I'm going to highlight what the question's asking me. I'm also going to highlight the key facts that I think in the question that I need to understand and need to recall to be able to answer the question. I'm then going to draw my triangle out as I did before. We're still looking at heart rate, so I'm just going to put my thumb over that heart rate, and that means I know the equation I need to use is heart rate is equal to cardiac output divided by stroke volume. So I then input my figures, 4,900 divided by 70, and that will give me a heart rate of 70 beats per minute. Okay, so there's the two examples. We've gone through them in quite a bit of detail there, guys. I've used those two examples to highlight another little point of this lesson. You will see that we've got an athlete, and these are all the details from the athlete question. They had a heart rate of 50 beats per minute, a cardiac output of 5,000 cubic centimeters per minute, and a stroke volume of 100 centimeters cubed. Now, you'll see that between the athlete and the non-athlete, the cardiac output is very, very similar. And that's quite normal. This is a fairly normal level of cardiac output. We have all got roughly the same amount of blood in our body, and it's getting pumped around roughly a similar size body. So our cardiac output doesn't really change that much. It does a little bit, but not that much. What has changed quite significantly is the athlete has a much lower heart rate than the non-athlete and a much higher stroke volume. Now, the stroke volume of an athlete is increased because regular exercises means that your body starts to develop and prepare itself for exercise. And by what it does to do that is it actually grows in size slightly, and you end up with larger ventricles. And that means if you've got a larger ventricle and you can pump more blood with every single beat of your heart, that means your heart has to beat far fewer times to pump the same amount of blood around the body. And you can see this really clearly in this ultrasound. Here we've got an ultrasound of an athlete's heart. We can see these chambers here are actually significantly larger than the ultrasound of this non-athlete's heart here. You can see this is these are the atriums, these are the ventricles here and here, and there's ventricles, and you can see that every chamber of the athlete's heart is actually significantly bigger than that of the non-athlete. And that's why they have a lower resting heart rate, because they're able to pump the same amount of blood with fewer beats of the heart. Okay, so back to what we were doing, guys, back to calculating cardiac output or stroke volume or heart rate. I've got 3 questions on the board in front of you now. What I'd like you to do, guys, if you feel that you really have full understanding of that formula triangle and its use, and you really do get this, guys, have a go at it. Pause the video now and have a go at these questions. For those of you that don't feel quite confident enough yet to really tackle them, I will be supplying some extra support before and giving you other opportunities to pause the video. So if you think you can do these questions off the bat with the information I've already provided you, then pause this video now and have a go at these questions. For those of you that weren't too confident about having a go at these questions at this point, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put 3 triangles up in front of you, 3 formula triangles there. So maybe now you've got enough information to be able to have a go at these questions. Again, using the examples we've just done and the information we've just covered. If you're not sure still, what we can do is cover those. So this is the final pause. If you now, I'd like you to, using those triangles, using those bits that are covered, pause the video and have a go with these questions. Okay, well done, guys. Well done for having a go. We are getting close to the end of the lesson. What I'd like you to do, we're going to go through the answers quickly now for these questions. We calculate the cardiac output when the heart pumps 80 cubic centimeters of blood at 55 beats per minute. So we're looking for the cardiac output. I've covered the cardiac output. We know that means that the cardiac output is equal to the heart rate, 55 beats per minute, times the stroke volume of 80 centimeters cubed. And that gives us a cardiac output of 4,400 cubic centimeters per minute. We're now going to calculate the stroke volume for a cardiac output of 4,800 milliliters per minute and a heart rate of 60 beats per minute. So we're looking for the stroke volume. We cover that up and it becomes the cardiac output divided by the heart rate, and that gives us a stroke volume of 80 milliliters. Because the question had milliliters at this point, I've used milliliters here. Because the first question was using centimeters cubed, I use centimeters cubed in my units. But you will see, very importantly, that there are units for both of those answers. Calculate the exercising cardiac output for a 10-kilometer runner who has a heart rate, whose heart rate has increased to 180 beats per minute, and they have a stroke volume of 100 milliliters. So we're looking at cardiac output. We cover that over. We know that cardiac output is heart rate times stroke volume, and that gives us a massive cardiac output of 18,000 milliliters per minute. That's absolutely massive, and that's obvious, really. As an athlete or as someone who is exercising, then suddenly all the muscles of your body that you're exercising do require more oxygen, and so they need a better flow of blood. Okay, next slide. Okay, guys, so we're getting really close to the end now. I've gone on a little longer than I intended, but we are getting close to the end. This is the homework page that I'm going to get you guys to have a go at. You can submit the homework to Shobi, www.shobi.com. Your class code is there. It's 9LCB9. And if you can have a go at these questions and then upload your answers onto Shobi with that class code. So the question is, an elite female athlete has a stroke volume of 100 milliliters when she is sitting down. Resting, her heart rate is 48 beats per minute. When the athlete is competing, her heart rate increases to 180 beats per minute. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to calculate the athlete's cardiac output, both when she's resting, and she's got a resting heart rate of 48 beats per minute, and when she's competing and her heart rate increases to 180 beats per minute. And after you've done that, guys, what I'd like you to do is to write a short paragraph, treat it as a 4-mark question, so looking for 3 or 4 points to discuss, explaining why the athlete's heart rate increases. I don't want you to describe that the athlete's heart rate or cardiac output increases. What I would like you to do is explain why. And you might need to draw upon some of the lessons previously, looking at diffusion, looking at, what respiration and all those various aspects that you've looked at over previous lessons, but try and see if you can draw some of those facts in as well. But it's a 4-point question, guys, so you're looking for 4 answers on that. But have a go at those questions and submit them to Shobi. Well done, guys. Well done for sticking with me. You've done really well, guys. We're now going to move on to the exit ticket. It's a simple 5 questions. These are all questions of information that's been covered during the lesson that we've just done. What I'm going to do now, I want you to do now is just pause these questions, have a go at the answers, and we'll be back. I'll be on hand after you've had a go, and we'll try and we'll go through the answers after you've had a go. So pause the video now, and we'll go through the answers afterwards. Okay, guys, well done for having a go, and well done for sticking with me and getting this far, guys. We are going to go through the answers to this exit ticket. Now, list the order in which blood flows through the heart, starting with the vena cava and finishing with the aorta. I'd like you to include the lungs and associated blood vessels. That was the question, and there's the answer. It goes from the vena cava to the right atrium to the right ventricle, then into the pulmonary artery, taking blood away from the heart to the lungs, still deoxygenated at this point, goes to the lungs, gets oxygenated, comes back via the pulmonary vein into the left atrium, into the left ventricle, that chamber with the much thicker wall. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. And then pumps out into the aorta to the rest of the body. What is the purpose of the bicuspid and tricuspid valves? These were those valves that separated the atrium from the ventricle, and their main purpose is to ensure that blood flows in the correct direction, to ensure that blood, when the heart contracts, blood isn't being squirted from the ventricle back into the atrium. Why does the wall of the left ventricle have thicker muscle? Why is it a thicker wall? Because it has to pump blood around the rest of the whole body, and it requires a lot of effort to do that, to create the pressure to get the blood all the way around the body. What is the heart rate of a man with a cardiac output of 4,500 milliliters per minute and a stroke volume of 90 milliliters? Now, if we can remember from our equation triangles, that's a cardiac output, and that means it is, we're trying to find the heart rate, so we need to divide the cardiac output by the stroke volume. So heart rate is equal to 4,500 divided by 90, giving us 50 beats per minute. Athletes often have slower resting heart rates than non-athletes. Why? Regular exercise increases your stroke volume. If each beat of the heart pumps more blood, then the heart can beat less to move the same amount of blood. And that's effectively why athletes or athletic people often have a lower resting heart rate. Okay, guys, well done. You've done amazingly well. The amount of people that are logging onto these videos is really quite cheering. You guys are engaging with this work in a very effective and efficient way, and I really do appreciate it. So I'll just pop back so that you've got that Shelby, and we'll go back. The Shelby is class code 9LCB9. This is the homework. If you wanted to pause the screen now to get straight on with the homework, it's all there in front of you. Other than that, I'm going to say thank you very much, guys. Well done for logging in. Well done for engaging with the work that we're providing. I hope you have a lovely week. Enjoy the sunshine, and I'll see you sometime next week with another video. Take care, guys. Have a good week. Cheerio now. Bye-bye.